Good morning, everyone. It is March 21st for this taping, Friday. We're going to cover 3 chapters, 2 Samuel chapters 11 through 13. A quick overview of chapters 11 and 12 is basically about lust and deceit and the sins that David commits. Chapters 13 and 14, and I will only cover chapter 13, but basically those chapters go into David's family and all the problems that come out from, frankly, the sin that David does with Bathsheba. So today I'm going to cover chapters 11 and 13 of 2 Samuel. So 2 Samuel chapter 11. David sins against Bathsheba and her husband Uriah. And David's temptation, basically the very beginning, he should have been leading strategically his troop. They were in battle, and instead of, he was idle, and this idleness leads him into temptation where he covets another man's wife. This wife is one of his soldiers, and he commits adultery, murder, lying. He basically breaks at least 5 of the commandments. And this sin starts with the lust of the eyes. And he inquires about Bathsheba, a married woman, and Bathsheba is the granddaughter of I'm not pronouncing right, Ahithophel, which is one of his favorite counselors. So there he had knowledge of Bathsheba, and David knew the law, and his plans to plot out and murder Bathsheba's husband and all of the things that goes on. You find that Bathsheba gets pregnant and then is with child. Bathsheba winds up marrying David and bears a son. But the saddest verse in this chapter is verse 27, which says, "The thing that David had done displeased the Lord." And this is such a sad chapter, because David had so much. I mean, he had an incredible relationship with the Lord, and yet he allowed lust. It's a warning to us about temptation. You know, when we start inquire things that we should never be or have business or, know a boundary, it really is really important to recognize that as we walk on this side of heaven, that there are temptations, but we must have, as a life application, an idea ahead of time of what you would do in situations so that you would not be tempted. Now, God is changing you, and He is the one that you allow Him to work on your heart. But we also have a responsibility in watching out what we read, what we see on TV. Turn off the things, turn away from it. I remember getting in conversations which you have no business about, especially of the opposite sex. If you're married and you recognize that you're going into a level of intimacy that has nothing to do with where your boundaries of a relationship is, you need to run away from things like that. So it's really important to learn that here is a man after God's heart, and how he totally failed. 2 Samuel chapter 12, we go into this whole story of Nathan, who confronts David and David's confession. And verse 1 of chapter 12, the Lord sent Nathan to David. I love that the Lord still, is chastising David, but saw in David the potential and recognized that his plan, his will for David. Now Nathan confronts David about his sins, and he uses a parable, uses a story as an illustration. You can read about it. But what I love that the Lord uses Nathan to state to David, and that's verse 9. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in God's sight? He really is making David search his heart, and this adultery and the murder has consequences. And while God is gracious, there are consequences to sin. And you will see that not only does Bathsheba's son die, but also David's sons Ammon and Absalom and Adonai are all slain later on in the storylines. And David's daughter Tamar is raped, and there's just all this. David's remaining life is when he starts to experience difficulties, and it falls in this pivot of David's fall and failure and temptation. Verse 13 and 14 of Samuel 12 says, David confessed, I have sinned against the Lord. It wasn't just all the other people that he sinned against, but he recognizes that he has sinned against the Lord. And David is, if you remember, he's also the author of quite a bit of Psalms where he speaks about, I think it's Psalm 103, where the Lord forgives all our iniquities and redeems our life from destruction. And yet he also knows the consequences of his past failings. So Nathan is used by God to speak to David, and there's a whole, as we said, this whole storyline where Bathsheba's son dies. And this event kind of begs the question, when Uriah and the baby, they seemed very innocent in this circumstance, and yet evil prevailed. That came from David's heart. And the question of how does, God allow that to happen? I think we have to trust that our faith is in God, who is good, who is eternal, and knows the eternal outcomes, and that we live a life that is not dependent on our own explanations of trying to figure it out, but on what we understand of the character of God and his promises. He is a holy God. He's a just God. He is a God that has order. And so we just need to give it to the foot of the cross. We need to give it to God and say, I may not understand this, but I'm trusting you in the goodness and the eternal consequences of Uriah and the baby. Now, David in this chapter fasts and prays, and he shows faith to God that he loves this baby and cares for Bathsheba. But you see the son dying, and there's this place where David washes himself, changes his clothing. He goes and worships before the Lord. And this symbolizes David's new beginning with the Lord, his desire for a change of his own heart. You see a quick change on verse 24 and 25. All of a sudden, we've got 9 months that kind of transpire, because Bathsheba now bears another son, Solomon, and Solomon is slated to build the temple. You also then find out that in the storyline that Joab finishes the capture of Rabbah, and the Ammonites are defeated, and David becomes victorious. And however, now in chapter 13, we transition into chapters that start to go into the infighting that goes on in David's own family. So chapter 13 is basically David's, all of his household troubles. And again, I mentioned to you that there was judgment on David's legacy. You've got 4 sons that die, and you've got, Tamar that's been raped. There's a lust that has happened, and what happens is hatred comes into murder, and then there's exile. And what you have seen, what happened to David, now you see some parallel journeys going on with David's legacy, in specific Absalom, Tamar, Amnon. Absalom is one of his sons and is a direct sister to Tamar. They had the same mother. And Amnon, again, another son of David. He's the oldest son. He's the one that has, as you read the storyline, the lustful thoughts of his half-sister Tamar. And he lies to his father, pretends to be ill, and then there's the story of incest. It's a horrific story, and you see then Absalom waits 2 years to revenge the raping of his sister Tamar, and Absalom also kind of follows his father's evil ideas, examples, in plotting murder, and he gets one of his servants to go and basically get Amnon drunk, and they kill him. And so there's this back and forth horrible thing that goes on Absalom flees to his maternal grandparents into Geshur, and David is left in Jerusalem and he's mourning over his son. So David's example of lust, lying, not following the Lord's commandments, it infiltrates his legacy with his children. And perhaps rather than, when you read it, it's troubling to read that why did not David spend more time inquiring of the Lord the wisdom to deal with Tamar's victimization by his son Amnon? There's no mention about it. Could have David had more influence in leading his household? I don't know, but what I want to do in life application to myself is the grace to us as we as parents, as we as influencers, we must set an example to the people that we care about and what it means to follow the Lord in our obedience, in our knowing of the intimacy of who God is. Our hearts must be set on that wonderful pilgrimage that is Jesus' transforming work in our personal walk, so that we can inspire our children, the next generation, our legacy, and those that we come into contact with. And I am so grateful to be involved in this Bible study and to be on this walk with you. Bye for now.